there must be like a good modern mechanism for that where you can have like if we each had a device where we could like have a shared countdown or something, but it was literally.
I think it's just the internet now because everybody's watches are just always synced all the time.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 380 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the tools programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artist.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is September 9th, 2020. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. So be prepared. Be prepared for that. We'd also like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you very much for letting us grab your money so we can keep our microphones powered. We're trying to get them powered by nuclear fusion technology, which is really coming along.
Yeah, it took a lot of investment though. So keep that flowing.
So far, worldwide, we are just like trillions of dollars deep into this. We've only managed to heat plasma to 100 million degrees Celsius for like 30 seconds, which is almost enough to get a podcast episode out. So, a little bit more money, and I think we got it. Mm-hmm. And then also, I think we'll solve all the world's energy problems too, which would be pretty great. But mostly, it's the podcasting that is the focus.
Can you imagine how much crypto we could all have? It would be amazing.
That's true.
Oh yeah, everybody would have billions of cryptos, and then we'd all be rich.
Yep, that's how that works.
That's how it works. All right. Well, we've got some life news. It's been a couple of weeks since we last recorded. I was at the end of one of the episodes. I said, I was going to be in Amsterdam on a trip. That did not happen. Our grandfather died during the previous couple of weeks. He had been not doing too well at the end of his life, and so it was
late stage Alzheimer's and all that.
Yeah.
Stuff.
So it was not entirely, it was kind of unexpected, but it was one of the, everybody's kind of always bracing themselves for like some kind of cascade of problems at some point when somebody reaches that stage of life. So it was a tough time. We went and spent some time with the family. So I canceled my trip and we all got together and went up there. We were pallbearers at the funeral, which, was a strange experience, I have to say.
I think the weirdest part of it is that nobody warns you just how heavy the casket is.
Yeah, it was incredibly heavy.
Yeah,
and they were just I knew going in because like it's a farm family, right? So it's like our uncles are just these huge dudes, and they can crush like
they're neutron stars. Let's be real.
They're like a never-ending story of that rock guy, that like can just eat rocks. It's like that kind of a vibe, right? And so like just like farmer strong, right? And then here like we come along, but in particular me as this computer dwelling, hobbit, right? With just no strength whatsoever. And I warned them ahead of time. I was like, cause they were like, oh yeah, we're going to need you guys to be pallbearers or whatever, And I was like, I will not be able to help, I could be there symbolically, I guess. But even though I knew that I was weak and it was like kind of a joke, it was like, that was going to be kind of hard, I wasn't prepared for just how out of my depth that was.
That was
heavy.
Shockingly heavy thing to carry around. Even with, I think there were 6 of us on the thing.
There were 6
7 at one time.
Yeah. But we also had dramatically varying heights.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like so that doesn't, it doesn't help. But and also, I had, my first response to like, hey, we want you to be a pallbearer. First response was like, no.
Yeah, same. Yep.
It's going to be hard enough already to be there at this, just like emotionally, to be there at this thing. I don't want to also have a job that involves, physical labor and all this stuff. And then I thought nobody wants to.
Yeah, it's not
that, right? Like
nobody jumps on that opportunity.
And it's kind of like, this isn't about me.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'll do it. because somebody's got to do it, and it was our grandpa's request that his grandchildren be the pallbearers. And it's like, yeah, we'll definitely do that.
Yeah, I think it is one of those things too where it's as heavy and potentially dangerous. I was worried because I've just sort of finished a bunch of PT fixing my low back.
Yeah,
and this thing is so
I felt
heavy.
the torque.
Yeah, and it's
in
on
my back.
and it's only on one side too. Like you're just holding on with a right hand or left.
Yes.
Hand, right? And so,
yeah. It was so heavy compared to my weakness that I wasn't even in risk of injury. I was just in risk of just like collapsing, just falling to the ground.
Yeah, as we were making our final sort of walk over to the gravesite, and Adam and I had swapped spots after the first one. Adam was like, "I think I'm going to die," because he was in the heavier end.
It was much better the second time.
Yeah, so we swapped spots. But yeah, I don't know how you got down the stairs the first time in that position you were in.
It was rough.
It was so heavy that as we're walking toward the gravesite, it's only like a 15-foot walk or something like that. And I was genuinely, because I could feel my low back in that exact spot where it's torqued before. And I was
You feel your
"Please don't."
body just decompensating.
I was like, not now, let's go. It somehow made it to actually happen.
Hold it together, Sam.
But yeah, I think it is one of those things that it becomes a meaningful thing after the fact because it's it's a heavy, hard thing to do. But I mean, that's kind of, in a weird way, it's like a
Physical representation of the act
of the whole situation,
emotional
thing. So I think
it
it becomes actually nice if you survive it. But I think that's what I want to get at because like people said like, oh, yeah, you're gonna be a pallbearer, and I didn't have really two thoughts about it as far as wanting to do it or not because I just didn't realize how heavy that thing was.
Yeah,
but I think
I had a suspicion because I was like, actually, it's more I just started from the standpoint that I know how weak I am, and I was like, no matter what it is, it's going to be heavy for me to do. So that was my kind of.
It could be 18 pounds.
Yeah, so it was immediately I was
decimate my whole system.
Yeah, well, because originally because it was also like you're just like the grandsons. Literally, there are 4 of us, right?
Yeah,
and I was like, and my original response was, I don't think that's possible. And I was Googling around. I was like, how heavy is a casket? And it's like around 400 pounds, and it could be more depending on the casket of the person and so on. And I was like, this is not going to work. But unfortunately,
another funeral immediately.
Two of our what do you call them? Cousins-in-law? Is that what that is?
It's the husbands of our 2 female cousins on that
it must
side.
be cousins-in-law.
Cousins-in-law?
We'll just call them cousins, whatever.
So we had 2 cousins-in-law to help out too.
Yeah,
but it was like
we had 6,
but we only had one like literal farmer in that group though. Do you realize that? Here we are in a sea of farmer strength, right? And it's just like we'll take mostly the weak
computer
people.
nerds,
the computer
squishy, us squishy nerds, doing our best, But yeah, so that was our past couple of weeks, and I gotta say, our grandpa was a character.
Oh yeah,
he was the toughest person I've ever known, and he also had all kinds of life hacks. One of which was he had whenever he needed to go to any kind of event, basically anytime he left the farm, right? So he's like going to see, like once, he went to see Adam in Chicago, right? When like Adam was going to college there. Or he would like when he goes to church, basically anytime he went anywhere, weddings, whatever. Anytime he left the farm, it's like, okay, that means it's an event. It's a fancy event. And he always just wore like khakis, blue shirt, and a white cardigan.
Yeah.
And because that was
just the same one, like it was
the same one for like 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And so because that was just his look for getting dressed up and going somewhere, then everybody knew like no matter what the event is, he's going to look good. He's going to look nice. He's going to look put together. He's not going to adhere to the specifics of whatever the dress code are, but he left the farm and he put on his signature look and he's good to go. Yep. Right. And so, man, that guy saved so much money on outfits.
And it was the mere fact of him having left the farm was already sufficient evidence that like he cares about the thing because he could not tear that man away from doing work. He's one of those guys.
Him being somewhere was a huge deal. You know,
and so the fact that he still put in even that much effort, where he like,
I'm just happy he's here.
Got cleaned up, put on his nice clothes. But it was funny because he also like for as long as I can like vaguely remember. Anytime he's also always wearing a like baseball cap, right? But it's always from some
John Deere.
It's always a
brand.
John
For the
Deere.
past-
John Deere cap. Yeah.
Yeah, for the longest time, it's been just a John Deere cap. Before that, there was like a Cargill seed. It's just like various kinds of things, right? But like every time he's outside working, that hat is on, right? If he's doing other stuff, the hat's gone, right? But it was very funny because of the way they had him, presented at the visitation thing. The casket's open, and he's laying there in his cardigan, in his like core outfit, with his John Deere cap like resting on his chest, and it was just it was like, yeah, it's one of those things that I think a lot of people, a lot of families would feel like that was somehow like didn't have enough decorum or something, like it didn't.
I was honestly
Right.
worried that they were going to like put him in a suit or something.
Yeah,
'Cause I was
exactly,
like,
yeah.
that's not who he was.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah, but it was just like exactly him.
yeah. Yeah. So it was great. They
The
nailed
service
it.
was great, and it was all very well done, which is really wonderful. Because I think those things are hard enough, but I think having it so that all the pieces feel like it doesn't feel like everything was out of place, which is great. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to have that feeling that someone doesn't actually understand who they're talking about or who they put in the casket. And they really got it.
And it was, and I think given that too, like our grandpa's whole thing was just hard physical labor day in, day out for his entire life, right? And sort of the final kind of, it's not even a joke exactly, but it's like the final, I don't know, just cosmic moment, is that try to get his casket lowered into the grave. Like they have this, I haven't been to many funerals, and I think usually they don't do this, but we wanted to have this like thing where we threw like dirt in on top, like soil from the farm kind of a thing. And so we needed the casket lowered so that we could do that. Because I think usually for these things, the casket's still up above the grave, and then everybody leaves and they handle that later, right?
And then they do the actual burial without the
So I think this is kind of like they're not used to it being like an on the spot kind of thing, and it's a slow process, but it's extremely manual labor intensive because it's a contraption. It's like
basically a series of like
pieces
winches
on and
and
off.
cables and stuff that lower this 500-pound object into the ground.
Yeah, it was very like interesting and cool, but it was like the guy who was doing it was like he was breathing so loud. He
was busting his ass,
sweating, so
trying
hard.
to get that thing down there.
And he did, like he got it all the way down, and then with a lot of effort and struggles. But then there's a final step of like pulling up the cables and stuff, right? Which that part probably could have waited until we left, like in retrospect. But I think they didn't expect it to be as much of a struggle as it was. But it was just like caught under the casket, and so this guy for like 5 minutes, 10, I don't know, it was a long time
because of where it was positioned. Oh my god!
Just wrestling
He's
this
just
cable,
like
just
trying to get this
cranking
cable out of there. and this whole like scene of like this like kind of janky machinery, right? That's like mostly like manual labor kind of a thing, plus like this really heavy load that it just has to get in there, and you're gonna make it happen no matter what it takes, right? Well, it's just like a perfect kind of final scene where like I don't know if Grandpa would have appreciated like this scene necessarily. I have no idea, but he could definitely appreciate this like sort of
the fact that his last move was to make a couple of people just work their ass off, to get him down there. It was symbolic,
very much.
So he's a great dude. He lived a great life. That was that.
Kudos.
So other life news. So I got a Fitbit thing, one of these like watch Fitbit things, because I've been having some heart issues. I'm fine, but it's just one of those. It's one of those like, this is a little bit weird, and so it's you should just kind of like be checking in on it every now and then, kind of a thing. And I was like, well, I want to be able to monitor it myself, so at least I have a better sense of what's happening. So I got this Fitbit because it tracks your heart rate just all the time, and you get all your graphs and whatnot. And I think you can even do stuff like get like monthly reports where it compiles everything into a much more like granular data that you can then go through in like a PDF form and stuff. But one of the interesting things about it is that it will track your sleep. And so it does stuff like it tracks your heart rate and your skin temperature and stuff to try to discern like which stages of sleep that you're in and like whether you're awake and, you know, all of that. Right. And so I was talking to Sam about this earlier in the week because I've always been under the impression that I'm not good at sleeping. Okay. Like that I toss and turn all the time and I'm kind of restless and it takes me a long time to fall asleep. But the problem with evaluating your own sleep is that you are unconscious during it, you know? So
You're sort of
the only
evaluating
parts,
the wake, how you feel when you wake up as actually you're evaluating. Yeah.
Well, you're evaluating two things. One thing is that when you is how you feel when you wake up. The other
And then
thing
your
is
vague recollection of having woken up or not. So,
the times and of course those are the negative parts of the night where like you woke up for some reason, right? And then you're trying to fall back asleep again. But because you know your brain tends to sort of like put an outsized weight on negative experiences, then even if you woke up for just like a few minutes and then fell asleep pretty quickly, in your mind, you may think back and be like, man, I was laying there for like 20 minutes and I just couldn't because I was like mad. You know, you don't actually know how long you were awake.
You're half out of it, basically.
Yeah. And you don't know the moment that you drifted off to sleep. It's not like you've got like a little like notepad where you're like, okay, I'm asleep now. Check, done. Right. So I've been kind of disoriented because I've been looking at my Fitbit stuff and it's like, basically it's telling me that I'm doing like a pretty dang good job of sleeping. Basically one thing is feels true, which is like, yeah, on a given night, I'm awake for about an hour. It's in like these little random moments, you know, where like you'll like kind of wake up in the middle of the night and, you know, for a few minutes here. Yeah. So it's kind of like these little moments that are peppered throughout the night, but then it's like, you know, quickly fall back asleep and then good to go. And so like one night, you know, it's like the dog is sneezing and there's like all kinds of chaos happening and stuff. And I woke up thinking to myself the way I always think, which is like, man, what a terrible night. You know, like I didn't sleep a wink. And then I look at my Fitbit and it's like, this was your best night of sleep in a week. And I'm like, what? And then
but what is it? I mean, what makes good sleep though? Because it's the interruptions that are the part that makes it bad. It's not. I mean, if you're like light sleeping, so it's like constant interruption, that's obviously bad, right? But if it's like deep sleep, like deep successful sleep, punctuated by even a couple times by in the middle of REM or something, you know, like at a part where you're supposed to be like actually restful. Because the thing that actually is the worst about sleep is, you know, waking up, right? Mostly, right? But you might do that multiple times, which makes it a bad overnight of sleep, right? But it's all about like where in the sleep cycle that happens, right? And
you would think so, but also like if you then just immediately fall back asleep again and enter back into that sleep state pretty quickly, then it's probably fine, you know?
Maybe, I don't know.
Probably. Yeah. Right. And so now I feel like who's gaslighting me here, right? Because I woke up and I was like, all right, I slept. I had a terrible night of sleep based on like the facts about the night that I can recall.
Yeah, because it should be evaluated based on how you feel, not based on what you think happened.
Well, that's the thing. Because then I was like, I feel pretty tired, but also I always feel kind of tired when I first wake up, you know, and then like within a half hour, like I had my morning routine and stuff, and like I feel fine. I feel pretty good, right? And then at that point, that's when I check my Fitbit, and my Fitbit is like, "Yeah, you slept great." and I'm sitting here thinking, have I just always my whole life been just generally pessimistic and like overemphasizing the negative aspects of my sleeping? And have actually just generally been sleeping pretty much okay.
Quite possibly. I think it's a weird thing because it's like the power of a narrative is what kind of comes into play here, which is like, oh yeah, I'm not good at sleeping, so you know, you start on that path, right? And you start now every time you wake up in the morning, you're searching for these clues about how bad of a sleeper you are. You know what I mean? And so everything becomes about tallying those things as opposed to essentially, waiting until an hour and a half after you've woken up. And then being like, did I sleep well now that I'm sort of in my body for the day? And there has been some really funny studies on this actually, where they've done stuff like giving people Fitbits and then fed them. I think it was like a Fitbit or equivalent.
It was like false data.
Yeah, fed them false
whatever,
data.
yeah.
So they would say like,
Give
"Oh,
them a
you
placebo effect.
to see like, can you cause a placebo effect with sleep?" And yes, you can. You could tell
You can
someone
cause it with almost anything.
almost anything. You could tell someone who slept great that they slept terribly, and they will feel worse during the day, and vice versa. You could tell someone who actually slept quite poorly. Actually, according to this, like, yeah, you slept great, and they will feel better. So I think what's odd about it is like the data is not the important part really of the sleep experience, right? It really is that sort of overarching narrative that you're putting yourself or like buying into for yourself. And yeah, you could use them like a Fitbit to sort of, hopefully correct it in the right direction. But I could also feel like I could see the opposite situation. Someone who thinks they're actually sleeping great and then they get a Fitbit and now they are like moody and, because
But I mean, because the only way you can correct something is if you've accurately, is at first you've accurately identified a consequence, right? As in like, I am tired in the morning in a way that I shouldn't be, right? Mm-hmm. So if you've correctly identified that, which is already not necessarily, as Sam's talking about, or necessarily true,
Questionable.
But
how do you know?
But now you have to, if you're like, okay, I think that's true and I want to fix it, let me evaluate my sleep, right? Using like a Fitbit or whatever. And now you start looking at the data, right? The problem is that what the fuck is correlated in the data?
Yeah.
Like you do not know. And there's sleep is still one of the weirdest things because like we spend a third of our lives doing it and barely understand it at all, right? So like, and this is what I was asking, like, I know for my own sake, like sometimes if I get like 5 hours of sleep, I feel way better, right? Mm-hmm. Than if I get, 7 or 8, right? And other times if I get like a seemingly the same, like, amount of sleep, like consistently, like, 7 or 8 hours, I just like start to feel worse over time when I wake up, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not as simple as like how many hours.
More is, yeah.
And yeah, I think one of the core things that my wife and I both have found is that waking up to alarms or being awoken by something, right? Like in the middle of the night, like those are the things that, as far as we can tell, seem to correlate the strongest with having a shitty next day, right? So like our bedroom is just like a global white noise machine. It's just like, there's just so much white noise going on that like nothing can penetrate unless it's very loud. And
it's a vault of,
and we use our, we have our lights on a timer to turn on in the morning, right? So that happens half an hour and like slowly gets brighter before our alarm comes on. So we're trying to like ease ourselves into wakefulness, right? Which like I'm still bad at because it's all still happening like too fast for me, but it's still better than it was. At least it seems to be. And I know my wife in particular is just like, it's like a, night and day difference, right? Between before we started doing that and how she felt in the morning, because interruptions are such a key, right? But
it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, interesting about the way you're talking about the dog, because like, so my dog occasionally will just wake up at like 4 a.m. and be like, I want to go out now. I gotta go do some business. And what's weird about it is the first couple of times that it happened, it was on that level of like deep, frustratingly annoying thing, right? Mm-hmm. And now, my wife and I sleep on the top floor of the house. We're 3 flights up, right? So this dog gets up at 4 a.m. You got to go down 3 flights of stairs, take him out, come back up 3 flights of stairs, right?
Yeah, you're really getting your heart rate up.
Yeah.
But you're running some stairs.
So it's similar. Where like you expect that this particular interruption would, especially given the length of it and like the exercise involved, would be very annoying. Mm-hmm. But weirdly enough, it doesn't seem to always be bad. Where it's like, I don't know if it's
again, it depends on I think it's the timing. Like, I haven't read about this for a long time, and I don't really know how much. My understanding of like sleep science was always that it's all a bunch of, we think maybe, but no real solid stuff. Right?
Largely, REM is
one
good.
Thing that I thought,
that's about it.
Yeah, and that waking up out of the REM cycle in particular is the one that fucks you up. But the timing, like it's you actually go through like 4 like sleep cycles a night. Everybody's different, of course, right? But like, so you're not just like, it's not that you go to sleep and are just in a deep sleep once you get there, right? It's already the case that you're going through these cycles. Mm-hmm. And supposedly, the last I knew anything about this, the consensus, as I recall, was that uninterrupted REM was basically like the key to feeling actually good the following day, right? So,
but what does it mean to interrupt it? Because
it has
to
be woken
stop
up out of it.
Yeah, but like it has to stop at some point, right? Mm-hmm. And so like does it matter that you like go from REM to like some other phase of sleep when it's like quote done, or can you just wake up directly from REM and it like the fact that you were in REM sleep for that long that's the thing that mattered?
I don't know.
It seems weird that like
it is
you could-
actually interrupted. Like as in like if you're going out of REM naturally as you're sleeping, you're into these like lesser unconscious states, right? That are in those parts. That if you wake up out of those points, because it is still like the amount of REM that you get is supposedly very important, right? But also how you wake up. Yeah, and if you wake up when you're already like floating towards consciousness in the first place, just like naturally, then not coming out of like this deep brain state as if, because when your brain is responding as if it's an emergency, like when an alarm goes off, right? Like it's basically being like yeeted out of this like deep cozy space, right?
Right.
And anyway, but again, I don't know. I don't know how much.
Because my understanding is like that during sleep, something is happening in your brain where there's like some kind of like
cleaning and
hormonal. Yeah, it's like doing some stuff with like surges of different like hormones and things like that.
There's all kinds of stuff going on.
So it does make sense that like it's not like a checklist where it's like REM sleep, check, did that one for 15 minutes, right? Because it's like
it's all fuzzy edged.
There's fuzzy edges. Like you've got to get into different phases and then also like cleanly get back out of them based on what your brain is trying to do. So yeah, it does make sense that
you can think of it like a recursive function, right? You like got to get all the way to the end and then you got to return all the way back up. But if something happens, if you could throw an error somewhere in that stack, right, as you're coming down, as you're coming back up, whatever. But a clean cycle is the thing that supposedly.
Yeah. Well,
there were all these claims that like it was like if you get in a complete number of REM cycles, like whether it's 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, if it's complete, then that's going to feel a lot better when you wake up, as in like you wake up when it's not in that state. Then as long as you went into it a few times and like you had the full cycle, then that's what is supposed to make sleep that makes you feel rested.
Yeah, I think so. Because some of my best sleeps have actually been, it's usually around 5 o'clock when if Yogi has woken me up to go take him out, then I'll come back and I do what I refer to as my second sleep. Because I sometimes I wake up around 5 or 6. And I think because I wake up and then my back usually aches a little bit and I'm a little hot anyways in the morning. So actually I cool down and kind of stretch a little bit during this, taking the dog out thing, come back. And usually these are nights when I have some of my best sleep is this sort of second sleep that happens from the like 4 or 5 to about 7 or 8 window. If it's like a clean thing.
Because if you get through another cycle, right?
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose there's so much. Sleep is like nutrition, right? There's some stuff out there that there is a bit of confidence about, but for the most part, it's like a complete mystery, and there's charlatans at every turn, right? So it's just one of those things. Like it's just so hard to know.
We know it's very important. You know what I mean?
It's very important for some reason.
It's important, and do it in the way that makes you feel the best. Because everybody's different too. Like there's some of these people who they claim they can sleep like 3 hours a night and just be like totally raring to go. And for the most part, people who claim that, it seems to be accurate.
Yeah, they have found they have done studies on people who literally do need just less sleep, which is sort of weird. But yeah, it's not the same for everybody. Everybody's a little different.
It's also like nutrition. There's no like just rule set that if you follow it, you're going to be a healthy person. Everything's fine. It's just everyone's got their own custom.
I guess in a way, sleep is like taxes, where like the government knows how much you need to pay, but they're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you.
You mean American taxes specifically?
Yeah. And if you don't pay the right amount, you're in trouble. Okay. You got to do it right, but you're not going to get any feedback about how you do it right until you fucked it up. Then at that point, you get a lot of feedback.
Perfect.
All at once. Yeah. So, the bill comes due. Get your sleep. All right. So let's talk about Crashlands 2.
Yeah.
Crashlands 2, bearing in mind there's been a strange, past couple of weeks. And so we've missed some work. But one of the things that we have been sort of just had on the back burner for a long time in Crashlands 2 is what happens when you die in the game. Okay. So up until now, death in the game was just like you would take a fatal hit and then you would just instantly just reappear back at your spawn point, which had some strange consequences. One of which was your character never actually like died. Like your character never disappeared or anything. And so if you were, for example, in combat with a creature close to your home base, and then it wrecked your shit, right? You got owned, you got pwned by this creature. You reappear like 10 feet away, and you're still in combat because all that really happened is we just replenished your health and then you teleported home. Another hilarious thing that would happen during this is that so we have like a juke ability in the game where you can like quickly. It's like the Dark Souls roll kind of a thing. It's not like an invincibility window, but it's like a quick dash in a certain direction. And whenever you initiate that dash, we figure out, we calculate like, all right, what's your path that you're going to dash across to make sure that you've got like an open, place to go and stuff. But if you died mid dash, then like you would teleport back to your spawn point, but then you finish the dash. You would finish the dash and end up at the originally intended destination. And so you do this like wild whipping around the map instantaneously thing. And then the final thing that was kind of fucked up about the death thing was that if you died really far away, you would teleport back home, but the camera would then it would pan back there. It wouldn't like teleport back there. It would zip across the map. And one of the features of Crashlands and Crashlands 2 is that like the map is pretty big, and so we do this dynamic spawning thing where we only spawn stuff that's in the immediate vicinity of the viewport. So most things that are off screen, they exist. Yeah, they exist as data, but they don't actually have like an object in the world.
There's no code running on them.
Yeah. Because having, 50,000, 100,000, whatever, creatures or trees or whatever, all running at the same time, checking collisions, can't do it, right? It's too much. Computers aren't that good yet. So for the most part, they don't exist. But then what happens is as the camera's whipping across the map, the game has to like instantaneously spawn and despawn all these things as we go across, which then is just hugely problematic in terms of performance, because now you've got all these residual like creatures that are still like wandering around way off screen waiting to despawn because they've got little timers on them and stuff. So it's just like
not great.
It's one of those like conceptually at its core, the death mechanic was like, yeah, you die and then you reappear at the start. But mechanically, we didn't really spend any time actually like implementing it and sorting out the jank.
I mean, it is one of those interesting things. It's like we've talked about the door problem in the past, and if you haven't heard of that, just do some Googling. There's some really nice articles about the idea. But the gist is that in video games, things that seem like they're going to be simple are often not, right? Because you have like your real life shorthand, and so like in that example, there's the door, right? It's like, so if you have a door in the game, right, then how hard could that be? Just put a door in there. Like,
yeah, as a designer, you just say, this game has doors. Yeah. And it sounds like as a human, you're like, yeah, I understand what a door is. Yeah. So no problem.
And so now as the programmer, then also as subsequently QA, right? Like how do you implement and how do you evaluate the implementation of a door, right? It's like, well, what are all the questions you have to ask? It's like, okay, can the doors be locked? Can I see the character go through it? How does the character know they're next to it?
How do they open it?
How do they open it? Can they take stuff through it? What happens if they're in? What happens if they're holding something when they go through? What happens to their inventory? What happens if they're dying as they go through? You're like,
what happens if something is blocking the door? Does it open anyway? Does the door have to check for
does
a collision?
It have to know it's blocked, right? Yeah, so like the list starts to all of a sudden of like what has to happen to just have a door.
If an enemy is too big to fit through the door, does it know how to crouch, or is it just trapped now, or does it just clip through the door?
Yeah, the list goes on and on,
etc.
So death in a game is the same deal, which is like you just think of it as like, oh, I die and I respawn. Like that seems very simple, right? But as Seth just described, the reality of like this enormous running contraption that is like the game with all of its parts doing stuff, right? What does it mean for all of that when you die?
Yep.
And then what happens under all these different conditions? Like you're juking across a river and then you die mid juke, right? Like there's an endless number of just design questions that have to be answered, but then also unintended consequences to any single one of those. And so it might sound weird that like that's really complicated. We decided not to address it until we had a whole bunch of more stuff like in place, right? Except it has to occur in this complex context. So we can't really know how it's supposed to work until like a lot more of the context is there.
Yeah, I think the major part for us was that we knew we wanted death to be more meaningful than it was in the original, where in the original Crashlands, when you died, you just drop like the last 15 things you picked up, which basically amounted to like cutting the last 3 trees you cut down, essentially, right?
It would set you back by like 12 seconds.
Yeah, tops. And because the world's procedural in that case too, you don't need to go back there because you just go anywhere and you'll get the same stuff. You know what I mean? So who cares, basically? It was basically just a little time hit, but not really anything else. So with this one, we wanted to ask a different question, which is instead of asking the question, how do you make death essentially non-burdensome for the player? It's just a different framing, different question, which is how do you create a death that would enhance the actual overall cores of the game, the exploratory components, the curiosity components, etc. What would that look like? And of course, rolling in the absurd stuff that we like to do. So
yeah, and as a note, my favorite model of things. So like death is just things. Something went wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Like something went poorly for you, and you failed, right? So one of my favorite games is Kerbal Space Program, and what always happens in Kerbal Space Program is when you fail, your Kerbals are stranded. Either they just exploded, dead, yeah. And that's done now, right? Or they've run out of fuel somewhere and they're just trapped. They're like stuck on a moon or on another planet, or they're just floating around in orbit. And so what I love about Kerbal Space Program is failing one mission is that's now the start of the next mission, because you're like, I got to get my Kerbals back. Yep. And so you figure out some kind of plan to make a contraption to like get into orbit and rescue them. Yeah. And it's so a failure is just like the starting point of a new adventure. Yeah. Right.
But it all depends on the design, right? Because like if in Kerbal Space Program they designed it so that the Kerbals like starve to death pretty quickly in the absence of like, or run out of life support or something, right?
Yeah, then you got nothing to then that's over.
There's no way you could have enough time to like do anything. But if you could keep repeatedly attempting rescue missions that you don't even need to do, right? Mm-hmm. But there could be like science points trapped on the thing. But also you just like your Kerbals. They're these little cute guys, you know. So then you end up going on these like really wild adventures that you are a consequence purely of your own actions, right? Mm-hmm. But the game gives you space to explore that by how they chose to handle the question of like what happens if you get stranded in space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think that the whole framing of failure is just the start of another kind of adventure is sort of what we wanted to pull on and see if we could really pull off in the case of Crashlands 2. So basically, what happens now is similar to the original, you drop stuff when you die, but dissimilar to the original, you drop all the stuff, all the components that you currently have on your person. And it's not Dark Souls like where, if you do it again, they just explode. So you just gotta come back to your body and find it. But the nice thing about that is because the game is not procedural now, the place you died is by definition, because it's all a hand-built world, is an important place that has a thing going on, right? It might be that you got sort of ambushed by something, could have run into a creature that you needed to fight, could have just died sort of casually on accident by, getting into too many brawls or something.
Just touch something you were
touched the wrong thing. But then it does become this like, okay, I do need to go back and get that, but I don't necessarily, it's okay if I fail in the attempt to go back and get it. So keep that lightness present. And then we're experimenting with whether or not to basically have this kind of like a timer of sorts there where healthy duration, like half hour of actual gameplay time, that after which basically the box holding all your goodies would, kind of implode, and then you actually would lose all of them. So the question there is like, does that apply a level of urgency that's really fun to work with? Again, like, does it do what we want it to do from a design standpoint? Does failure cause the next adventure without becoming this sort of overly burdensome thing? And that's kind of where we're going with it. So
yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because like there's not just an answer to that. It's so easy to argue at it because like it's easy because like my gut reaction to that question is, well, if the game is about getting to choose what you do next, if you're now on the clock to get your stuff back, then you really only have one thing you can do next now, right? And so then that takes away from the thing. But on the other hand, it provides this like interesting consequence of death plus a sense of urgency so that you actually need to go do that. Plus it also constrains you to having to get back into that same space where you just died, right? While the stuff that killed you is still potentially kind of going on because so I think about this with like Valheim, where when you die, you drop all your stuff.
Your whole body.
Wake up. Yep. You wake up in your bed naked, wearing like a loincloth or something, right? And you were wearing all of your best stuff, right? So if you were playing a lot, you might have like your backup shittier armor and stuff, right? But usually when you die, like it's in a place where you're gonna die again in all likelihood once you finally, if you even fucking make it there, because you have to run.
You couldn't
naked.
handle it before with all your great equipment, and now you're naked. So good luck with that.
It's one of those things that simultaneously creates these really fun stories where like my wife and I were helping one of her friends out who was playing on his own server, and he asked us to come help him because he went into this really hard part, which is like the plains if you've played Valheim, with these fucking mosquitoes that are giant. They just like one shot you. And he had died, so his body was over there, but he had like sailed the fucking ocean to get there, right?
Oh no.
So the amount of like investment that went into finally then having his body in this place.
And I guess at this point, the boat that you used is on the other side of the ocean now. So you'll have to build a new boat.
Call the Coast
Guard. Get back there.
And so we spent like 2 hours like trying to help him do that, which at first was like a very fun, like sort of self-driven story, right? But then because it was just so challenging that all we did, we just kept on losing investment after investment, right? And and that's what happens in games like that, where you invest really heavily into kind of irreplaceable things, is that it becomes really important to get them back, but also
you can't.
You can't though. Right? So it's one of the, it's so like trying to find that balance of.
Well, that's where there's a billion places to ease off how intense it is, and so like we don't actually drop your equipment, right? So you'll be able to go back with your armor, your gadgets, like all your stuff, that you've been using, that you had on your person at the time, just not your inventory of basically items that you use to essentially progress. Right. So it's almost like
we probably wouldn't drop your like special items that you can only find once and that kind of thing.
It's like quest items. Like there's basically a whole large category of things that won't drop because of the fact that if they are special and one-offs and then they get potentially destroyed if there's a timer involved, that's not fucking good because it's handcrafted world. You can't go get another one. There's only one of that.
Yeah, that was the one. Yeah. So we're not going to do that. Yeah. We're not going to just perma delete your progress and block you from progressing, but and I don't want to necessarily disclose what happens when you die in Crashlands 2. Instead, I'll just quote Carl from our QA team.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, because one of the things that's fun about having a QA team that isn't like sitting there with the developers through all of the design conversations is they just get to be surprised by stuff and we get to hear what they think about it. So Carl said, holy shit, that's incredible. That was the most unexpected death animation ever. So
buckle up.
And if you're trying to imagine like what that could possibly be, I promise you're
not. You're wrong. Yeah. We had to carry on the Crashlands tradition of like when you evolved your pet in the original game, that caught people by surprise. So we thought, let's do more of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was one of our. I think it's still one of my absolute favorite things watching people play original Crashlands. Is everybody had the same response to leveling up their first creature, which was first like shock and confusion.
First, it's like Pokemon, and then what?
and then just like gleeful amusement, right? And it was just so satisfying.
Yeah. The problem was like in the original game, that was one of the very few moments like that. And upgrading a pet was like, it took a while. That was a while into the game before you got hit by one of those just absolutely wild moments, So we're like, we should probably
pepper a few more of those.
Do more of those. So overall though, it's pretty great and it feels good, now that we actually have like a sensible mechanism by which the player can die and it's not janky and it's not broken. And so it makes the world feel more consequential and like things matter more. You gotta be a little more careful. And if you do fail at something, then now you've got a little mission to go on to get your stuff back. So overall, I think it's it's working great. And then, we got, like Sam said, we got a billion different knobs and dials we can turn. So if over the course of play testing and stuff, if it turns out that it's not working as intended, well, no problem.
Tweak it.
We want to make sure everybody has a good time. So, all right, I think we have time for a question.
Let's do it.
So this question comes from podcast.bscotch.net. So if you want to get your question onto a future episode, just go there and ask it. Highest upvoted question comes from CooCooCachoo, who says, "Hey, BScotch Bruddas. Curious if any of you have faced imposter syndrome during your formative years in game dev. What the experience was, if any, and when or what moment was it that you confidently say, 'I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer,' or 'I'm Adam and I'm the web fondler,' or even 'I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.'"
Fondler. I mean, I've had a lot of variations, but I don't recall
That's
that
a good one.
I think you might have done that one,
possible.
but and how did you really know deep down no one could tell you jack squat otherwise, even yourself? Self-confidence and sense of self isn't my strong suit. Love everything you do. Stay beautiful. Less than 3, which is heart.
I think it's always. I mean, I know for me, it's always there. I don't think it ever goes away. Largely when you see other stuff. It is in the art case. You see other stuff that people are making. It's very easy to just glance at someone's stuff and be like, "That's good." It's not. I have to go look at the architecture.
Yeah, I think
good.
I think that discipline is particularly hard to not get hit by that.
Yeah, a lot of people fall out on the art side because you look at all these artists who, and a lot of times like you come across people who are like 16 and Jesus Christ, like they're just unstoppably pumping out these incredible works already, and you're like, I'm 32. Sometimes I have a hard time drawing a face. What's wrong with me?
Faces are very hard to draw.
Yeah, I think what I've learned over time is really just. Is not the imposter syndrome doesn't go away. It's just, I think, it cultivated more self-compassion to be like, who cares if it's fine. It's fine if I don't.
Well, yeah. But yeah, I also feel that this is the framing to me of imposter syndrome is this idea that I'm getting results in a thing and people seem to believe that I know what I'm doing and people seem to believe that I'm good at it. Yeah, but I don't think that I am actually good. And it's not just a matter of time before
find out
I'm obviously out of my depth and somebody finds out about it. Right.
Right. That's different than just being like, I'm not feeling like you're not good.
I'm not good at a thing. Yeah.
Because it has to be feel like, despite the evidence that you are, right. It has to be that.
Yeah. So I have to say, I don't feel like I've struggled with a lot of imposter syndrome over my years of game dev because I feel like I've generally tried to be very honest with myself about what I know and what I don't know. And so for example, like if I was to start working on a 3D game at some point, right? I know that I basically know jack shit about how to program in that environment and how to think about programming in, say, like C#, which is what I would be doing if I was in Unity or C++ in Unreal Engine, right? And so at that point, I may get some good results, but I would know that's sort of like duct taped together. But I'm okay with that. And if people find out that I didn't really know what I was doing, that's fine because like it's true. And also, I have looked back on my own work so many times and be like, wow, I had no idea what I was doing back then. Yeah. To basically recognize that I generally don't know what I'm doing, and but neither does anybody else. Yeah. And kind of who cares?
It was an interesting thing on this though, which is like, so you as I'll use the term artist, but it applies to all these disciplines, right? You as the person doing the work are privy to all of the details of doing the work, which very often just largely amounts to being frustrated, being confused, kind of like putting hours in, being annoyed, whatever, and then something comes out, right? Yeah. People seeing the thing only see what comes out, and this is it's sort of a classical problem for I think for everybody who makes stuff, which is that you care a lot about how hard it was, oftentimes, how many hurdles you had to jump through, or how innovative you had to be in order to achieve the end result that you did. But the end result is all that anybody cares about. So if that end result you got, say you did a bunch of innovations on your side of things, you figured out how to do a bunch of stuff, but all you ended up with like your characters now have shadows under them. Nobody gives a shit about how hard it was for you to do that, because that doesn't matter, right? And so it's sort of a weird inversion of the imposter syndrome thing in a way, which is like the reality is that no one actually cares about the process. Nobody does, except for you and other people doing the work like you who want to figure out how to do it better, right? The people you're actually giving stuff to at the end of the day only care about the end result. And so I think that's basically where the imposter syndrome comes from, is this sense of like, I got this end result, but like I know how challenging it was to get that end result. Therefore, because it was challenging, it should not have been, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the part where it just is what it is. And I think I'm kind of in Seth's camp too, where over the years, I just got like deeply into the is what it is kind of territory, right?
Get out of the shoulds.
Yeah.
Territory.
Yeah, because I
go to the land of is.
Yeah, because I still want to do my job better. I want to understand things better. I want to do better work, right? And that drive pushes me forward, but without a sense of like corresponding guilt or a sense of not being good enough or not being good. It's more of just because it's not about there's no moralization of it, right? It's just here's where here's where I am. Here's what that means I can do. I want to be able to do all this other stuff, and I think I can get there by doing these things, but I don't actually know if I can. I'm just going to go try, right? Yeah. And I was actually just pumped. Like I was staying up until like 9 o'clock programming last night, and I was tackling a problem that I've tackled once every like 4 months for a year. And thrown just like hours at this problem, right? And it's one of these things that like seems like it should be easy, and then it just turns out it isn't. And then last night, I finally I was so confused, and I was like thinking so hard, and I finally like got it. I finally got it to work, right?
You had to power up like an anime protagonist,
right? But what that meant though is that I had these like 3 other over the past year, very long and frustrating like work sessions where the end result was that the thing I was trying to do, I couldn't figure out how to do. Even though I was pretty sure there was a way, right? Which meant I was accurately evaluated that like, this is possible. I just don't know how to do it, right? But that's happened to me so often that I was just like, okay, I'll try this again in another quarter, right?
You don't judge
when the problem comes again to see if, to see if like, because if I can't see a way to learn what I need to learn directly, then I basically just let the failure sit and then revisit it in the future when my brain just has new wrinkles for whatever happened in the intervening time, and just see if like something has changed in my perspective on things, my knowledge, my whatever, right? And see if that's how I can get over it. And it is still frustrating when I spend hours and like the end result is fuck, I don't know how to do this, right? But it's frustrating and like just that I was confused and it was hard and it just wasn't working, not in the way of like I'm punching myself, right? And there are things still today that like I've tried to do at various points that I still have not figured out and don't know if I ever will and don't know if I can. But those are just then things to work around when I'm solving problems, right?
You don't need to be mean to yourself. And that's what I mean as far as like the self-compassion.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's like,
you just know what you know.
It's fine. It's okay.
Yeah.
If it feels like kind of like maybe you suck at stuff, it's okay. But like, don't need to. You can just recognize where you're at.
Be as good at something as other people.
Yeah.
So there's something about this too that I feel like was really helpful for me, which was I'm pretty sure it was in the book, The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses. I'm pretty sure this was the book where the author, which I think is Jesse Schell.
I think it's Schell. I think it's from Schell Games.
Said something along the lines of like, what I want you to do is like pretend like you're putting a ring on your finger. Okay. Just make that motion. It's an invisible ring, but like this ring means like you're a game developer. Okay. Like the fact that you're wearing it, it means you are a game developer. So from the moment that you start programming your first game, you put that ring on, right? And you're a game developer now. Congratulations, right? And for some reason, and he's like, nobody else can see it, but they don't have to see it. Like, you know that it's there, right? And something about that really kind of like resonated with me where before I started working on all this stuff myself and learning how to program, I had a lot of ideas about what it looked like to be a programmer,
Yeah.
Like there's so many times you see in movies and stuff. It's like you see these fucking hackers like just going to town on the keyboard and they're like, I'm in, and like people are using all kinds of words and jargon that you just don't understand. And like as you're trying to figure out how to solve programming problems, you don't know what questions to ask. You're just stumbling around. You have no idea what's going on, right? But at the same time, you are still producing code that does stuff.
Yep.
You are actually solving programming problems.
It might be full of bugs, might be inefficient, but it's still doing things.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, that's a programmer. you're a programmer, right?
I think it's thinking of things as like a destination / threshold rather than
there's some
just
point
ownership of a path, right? Because like on any path toward anything, you start at zero. That's how that works. You don't get to start with anything, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that once you get to like mile marker 382, you're a programmer now. It's like you were a programmer at the beginning. Not a great one, to be honest. but that doesn't make you not a programmer. Yeah. That just means you're a beginning programmer, right? And I remember like having this conversation with Sam where he never called himself an artist until like a year after Crashlands came out. So he had been doing game art for 4 years at that point?
5 or 6 years.
5 years. And
we had literally millions of people who downloaded and played across all of our games.
And he would always frame it as like,
I love the art.
It's all like 4.5 star reviews, like
garbage.
Yeah. And the thing is like, and that's where the imposter thing comes from, where like you have an idea like what is an artist and what is an artist capable of, and do I look like that? And am I capable of that? Like, does my life look like what I imagine an artist's life looks like, right? And no, it's never going to, because it's all made up.
It doesn't look any given way. There's no just. And I think we kind of get some of this confusion because there are some like really well stereotyped paths that people can take, like becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer, right? For the first parts of those careers, it's like there's a standards body, there's like rigorous requirements, and but they're all very specific. But even in those, if you actually talk to people who go through that process, every person's experience is so fucking different, right? Even in these really tightly stereotyped things where there is a progression where it's like, oh, you're a medical student.
Yeah, an extremely controlled.
A resident. Right? Now you're an intern. Now you're an attending, right? There's like graduation that happens. And we grow up where every year of our lives, we graduate to the next year of school, right? So like we're trained to have this idea that you sort of unlock new things you get to do and are capable of doing in these like tiers over time.
Yeah. Like you're not a thing, and then you work toward the thing, and then at some point you become the thing,
And the reality is all of it is a discontinuous jumping kind of thing where there are no actual standards for anything. Like we try to put standards on things, but it's not actually possible. And so everyone's experience going through it is different. No two can look the same. And so there's just no such thing as like, oh, at this threshold, I can label this collection of like skills and capabilities and say that makes an artist or a senior artist or whatever. And you can see this too if you go look through how do people define, say like senior
programmer,
a senior programmer, right? You will not find two definitions that are the same from any pair of companies. There are even some standards bodies that have like done it for like certain countries and stuff, right? But even those, if you actually look at what they describe, you're like, this is very non-comprehensive, right? It's like it has almost nothing in it that are all these like softly evaluated things, because that is the best we can do. There's just no such thing as these thresholds.
Well, not only that, but I know for a fact that I would fail almost every programming interview at any company that has them.
I probably also would.
Because I know that one of the kinds of things that they ask about are sort of like
algorithms and data structures.
Algorithms and data structures. And the thing is, like, I can work with algorithms and data structures because I do that all day, every day, but I don't know the specific terminology and I don't memorize everything all the time, which is what they're testing for.
You didn't take comp sci classes and hash maps and
And so the thing is, like, does the fact that I couldn't get a programming job if I had to go through one of those interviews, does that mean that I'm not a programmer? Like, no.
While you're over here programming video games day in and day out, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And like I have had now a 10-year career programming video games. And so it's, you know, you can't judge yourself by standards that just don't make any sense for what it is that you're doing. Right.
Even when they do make sense, because sometimes they do, like, because like, so like for Seth, if he had understanding of the ins and outs of Game Maker, right, that would be like, those would be the kinds of things that he would need to do his job. And like, he's gotten better and better and better at that over time. Right. And so you still aren't judging yourself along that path. You're just trying to describe where you are in it and what's next. Right. Yeah. You're trying to evaluate the parts that seem like they should be easier for you to do, or evaluate the parts where like there's something that has a bad result. There's a hole, and you need to be able to fill in that thing for some reason. Because it's also a premature optimization problem, right? Like, you don't need to know about a thing necessarily until it's in the way. Because it is true that the more stuff you know, the more approaches you just have available to solve problems. But that's also true forever. You could just keep on knowing more things.
Yeah,
forever.
you don't actually need much to get started. Truthfully, in almost all these made. I think there's a really good. I think it was Sycra, Sycra, on YouTube, an artist guy who makes this big chart of like basically his mapping of all the different skills, and then like the normal jobs you would assign based on how good a person is at all of those different skills as an artist. So you got like design, you got, you know, composition, color work, like all this stuff, right? And the reality is like any one of these positions that he ends up looking at, if you're an illustrator, for example, you only need like the things that you need strongly, or like maybe 2 or 3 of those things, and then you need like just base level knowledge of everything else, right? And this is why there's always a joke in art circles, which is that very few are good at perspective, because perspective is extremely technical and really fucking hard and generally annoying. And so most people just use nowadays, you'll just mock up some shit in 3D, take a screenshot of it and paint over it.
Trace it.
Yeah. Because like, who cares?
But here's my counter argument to that is those people are good at perspective.
No, they are. No. I think it's a different thing
because they figured out tools to make it so they can perfectly render stuff in perspective.
They've solved the problem, but not in the way that, again, you have this like true programmer, true artist thing. It's like, oh yeah, I can't draw a box in like any perspective, just sort of willy nilly. Certainly, I can't hardly draw a face without like taking a bunch of time to figure it out. But like, who gives a shit? So I can do a bunch of other stuff.
I mean, all of those marks.
That's not the question, because the question is, can you draw a face? Yes, yes, you can. Can you draw things in perspective? Yep. Okay, who cares if your process is 3D thing, make a render, like, because at the end of the day, you've got a thing rendered in perspective, and like we were talking about earlier,
it's the end
nobody cares. Yeah, nobody cares how you got there. Can you do it? Yeah,
some
you can
people will, but those are assholes, right? I think this is the same idea as like whenever you hear somebody use the word crutch pejoratively, right? Where they're like, oh, you're just doing that. It's just a crutch. You need to like figure it, right? What do people use crutches for, right? It's because they're disabled.
You need them to get around.
They need them to get around. It's a mobility aid for people that
it's
need
a tool.
It's a tool. It's just a tool. Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't make any sense to criticize that. Like that's the most absurd thing that I can think of, right? But that's for some reason the metaphor that people use when you're using a tool to your advantage to accomplish some task, when they just think, or you just think if you're doing this to yourself, that you shouldn't need that tool.
Yeah, you know what I think? I think hammers are a crutch. You know,
callous your hands, you baby.
If you're not punching nails into the wall with your bare fist, then you're not a real carpenter.
If you're not molding your own keyboard, and right, and if you're not building your own CPU from the ground up before you start programming,
you know what? If you're wearing clothes, that's a crutch, get more body or less, depending, situation.
Yeah, get hairier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the point there being that any of these things, any tool that you're using to assist you in your ability to do something that you're trying to accomplish for whatever reason.
Great. Excellent.
Is a good, it's a perfectly valid thing to do basically across the board, unless you're doing something nefarious somehow. Right. But it's just fine. Like that's the whole thing about people is we're monkeys with tools. That's the whole that's our whole fucking thing, right? And so if you're gonna throw away the tools part, you're just a monkey again.
That's true.
Just get into the tools, embrace it, stop judging it. Don't judge yourself. Don't judge other people. Just use whatever you got to do. Just use whatever.
Because that mindset, it's arbitrary gatekeeping and line drawing.
Yep.
When I say line, I mean like drawing lines in the sand. I remember. line drawing is a good skill for artists.
Not for me.
But yeah, just to kind of close this out, because I remember when I first started programming, I was introduced to game jams, and I participated in Ludum Dare. Ludum Dare is a solo jam competition, and the idea of Ludum Dare is like you make everything yourself. So you make the music, you make the sound effects, you program the game, you make the art, you do all the stuff. You got 48 hours, and then it's judged at the end. And around the time that I entered my first Ludum Dare was shortly after they had allowed the usage of game engines like Game Maker and Unity and stuff, because there was a core contingent of Ludum Dare people, programmers, because they're all programmers, because you got to program your own game, right? Who were determined that if you use a game engine, then you're not a real game developer, because you have to code up the engine itself from scratch during the game jam and make the game in the engine that you made. Otherwise, it's cheating, right? And I thought to myself, why stop there?
Yeah.
Why don't you mine the fucking silicon and manufacture your own computer chip during the weekend? Why don't you?
Yeah, where'd they get the program? Even not even going that far. They're using a programming language, right? They're probably using
your own
C++
programming
or
language,
something, right?
you know?
So why are they using that?
How come you're using an internet protocol to communicate with the jam site? Why aren't you inventing your own ISP so that you can, hook into the network? What is this? What are we doing?
I do want to briefly touch, because this is actually, so the AI art thing is coming up real big, right? Everyone's dying.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a huge amount of chatter on the internet about it, which has been hilarious, because my stance has been, oh, cool, it's a good tool. That's about it.
Yeah.
Probably just like, I don't know, modeling
It's
some
like
shit.
GitHub Copilot. It's the same thing.
Yeah, or like modeling some shit in 3D for a 2D illustration you're doing. It's the same deal. You're sort of offloading some aspect of it that is kind of onerous or whatever else, or using it to enhance your skills. It's not going to replace people, because you can't do, unfortunately, you could do a lot of things with it. But I think as far as the reality of being, I think people who don't do art actually are confused about the reality of the specificity of the stuff you create.
Yeah.
It cannot, you can, I think about like the AI, a tool like that can get you started and get you a good part of the way in, and sort of not like to skip some steps, but basically integrate a few steps in the same way that modeling something in 3D and taking a picture of it would. But it's not going to get you just a final product that is exactly what you are trying to get, especially in the context of something like a video game, where there's too many other pieces sort of also involved.
Yeah, it's the same as GitHub Copilot. Yeah, it's like the same. It's the same idea. And there is a truth there that there are certain kinds of ways of approaching art or programming or whatever that this does like just take away, and which could mean if like that's the only part that you're interacting with, that takes away
your thing.
The need, I guess, for like you specifically doing that specific way, right? But it's actually a really tiny segment for the most part. As Sam said, it's just providing a new tool that can be integrated into the stuff that you're doing, right? And GitHub Copilot's the same way, where it's which is a AI tool that helps you code, right? It's like fancy autocomplete. But like I do, like when you're programming, programming isn't just like, oh, I need to go use this algorithm again. So like, let me go. It's usually down to being like, okay, what is my problem I'm trying to solve here? And if you're not trying to solve a specific problem, why are you working on this project, right? Because
you're just writing some code.
You're just writing some code for no reason. And if you're solving something that's like so non-specific that 1,000 other people have done it, then which is then what like a tool like that gives you, then why not just leverage that work and then move on to the stuff that is actually unique to what you're trying to solve. So yeah, it's this like fear of tools is and it like yes,
don't be a
Luddite. Changes
you
things.
know?
It absolutely. Every new tool absolutely changes things. Some of them very deeply and foundationally, and that's freaky. And like some people always get left behind for all kinds of varieties of reasons, and that can really suck. All that is true.
Some people get left behind, but some people just voluntarily stay behind.
Many people leave themselves behind. Yeah. And I think that's actually the more common.
Don't do that.
Yeah, and so it's I think but it's all part of the same problem of just seeing a thing that you can't do somehow with the arbitrary threshold that you've set as what counts as like you doing it. right? Or that somebody else sets, is seeing everything beyond that, every use of every tool as a pejorative crutch instead of an actual crutch to help.
Crutches
you
are
solve problems.
good.
Yeah.
Use them, especially if you've got a leg injury or something.
definitely.
You know, just like that's what they're for. So
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, I guess, yeah, long story short, you know, just be accepting of your current skill set, of the tools. Don't get judgy and weird about
Love
it.
yourself.
Just yeah, and accept the fact that if you're doing something, then you're doing it.
Yep.
And there's no like set threshold where like you're allowed to say that you're doing it. You can admit that you're doing it badly, and that's fair.
That's great.
You know?
To be honest, that's good.
That's healthy because that lets you improve if you know what your weaknesses are.
Well, and
But it doesn't mean that
also-
you're not doing it.
Yeah,
You're
but that's
still
also the
doing
thing
it.
that causes the conflict too, right? Is people who feel like they've put in all of the work to get to the point where they feel like they're competent at a thing. And they feel like they now, because they've been suffering the same thing the whole time, not feeling like they earned the title, right? And they finally get there and they feel like they've earned it. And like the classic being an asshole human thing is to see other people who haven't gotten there yet, then claiming that same title, right? And those are the people who then make a lot of noise and are just
You didn't
jerks
do it the way
about
I did, so
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Count.
So that's
Shut up.
just bad. That's just bad energy, bad behavior, right? It's like
Well, it doesn't help anything. It doesn't move anybody
and that's-
forward
but
anywhere.
It's the problem of having the concept of like the thresholds and the titles and stuff, right? Because you can just describe what you're doing as programming. Therefore, you're a programmer in the general sense. And then anywhere beyond that is now like, can you do a certain thing that needs to be done, right? And that's it.
That's it.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how you get there.
Yeah.
Can you do it? Well, there you go. You're good. You're that's what you are. You're a programmer. You're an artist. You can do it. Congratulations. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.